Hi, it's been a while. I have COVID, and I just remembered that we were doing this. So, gonna hop right back in. Um, we are on chapter 8, Intimate Immensity. Opening quotes from Rilke. Let me get comfy. Le monde est grand, mais non, il est profond comme la mer. The world is large, but in us it is as deep as the sea. L'espace m'a toujours rendu silencieux. Space has always reduced me to silence. One might say that immensity is a philosophical category of daydream. Daydream undoubtedly feeds on all kinds of sights, but through a sort of natural inclination, it contemplates grandeur. And this contemplation produces an attitude that is so special, an inner state that is so unlike any other, that the daydream transports the dreamer outside the immediate world to a world that bears the mark of infinity. Far from the immensities of sea and land, merely through memory, we can recapture, by means of mediation, the resonances of this contemplation of grandeur. But is this really memory? Isn't imagination alone able to enlarge indefinitely the images of immensity? In point of fact, daydreaming, from the very first second, is an entirely constituted state. We do not see it start, and yet it always starts the same way. That is, it flees the object nearby, and right away it is far off, elsewhere, in the space of elsewhere. When this elsewhere is in natural surroundings, that is, when it is not lodged in the houses of the past, it is immense. And one might say that daydream is original contemplation. If we could analyze impressions and images of immensity, or what immensity contributes to an image, we should soon enter into a region of the purest sort of phenomenology, a phenomenology without phenomena, or stated less paradoxically, one that, in order to know the productive flow of images, need not wait for the phenomena of the imagination to take form and become stabilized in completed images. In other words, since immense is not an object, a phenomenology of immense would refer us directly to our imagining consciousness. In analyzing images of immensity, we should realize within ourselves the pure being of pure imagination. It then becomes clear that works of art are the byproducts of this existentialism of the imagining being. In this direction of daydreams of immensity, the real product is consciousness of enlargement. We feel that we have been promoted to the dignity of the admiring being. This being the case, in this meditation, we are not cast into the world, since we open the world, as it were, by transcending the world seen as it is, or as it was, before we started dreaming. And even if we are aware of our own paltry selves, through the effects of harsh dialectics, we become aware of grandeur. We then return to the natural activity of our magnifying being. Immensity is within ourselves, is attached to a sort of expansion of being that life curbs and caution arrests, but which starts again when we are alone. As soon as we become motionless, we are elsewhere. We are dreaming in a world that is immense. Indeed, immensity is the movement of motionless man. It is one of the dynamic characteristics of quiet daydreaming. And since we are learning philosophy from poets, here is a lesson in 3 lines by Pierre Albert Birot. Et j'aimerais d'un trait de plume Maître du monde, homme illimité. And with a stroke of the pen, I name myself master of the world, unlimited man. Section 2. However however paradoxical this may seem, it is often this inner immensity that gives their real meaning to certain expressions concerning the visible world. To take a precise example, we might make a detailed examination of what is meant by the immensity of the forest. For this immensity originates in a body of impressions which, in reality, have little connection with geographical information. We do not have to be long in the woods to experience the always rather anxious impression of going deeper and deeper into a limitless world. Soon, if we do not know where we are going, we no longer know where we are. It would be easy to furnish the literary documents that would be so many variations on the theme of this limitless world, which is a primary attribute of the forest. But the following passage, marked with rare psychological depth, from Marcot and Therese Brosse's excellent work, will help us to determine the main theme. Quote, forests, especially with the mystery of their space prolonged indefinitely beyond the veil of tree trunks and leaves, space that is veiled for our eyes but transparent to action, are veritable psychological transcendence. I myself should have hesitated to use the term psychological transcendence, but at least it is a good indicator for directing phenomenological research towards the transcendencies of present day psychology. It would be difficult to express better that here the functions of description, psychological as well as objective, are ineffective. One feels that there is something else to be expressed besides what is offered for objective expression. What should be expressed is hidden grandeur, depth, and so far from indulging in prolixity of expression or losing oneself in the detail of light and shade, one feels that one is in the presence of an essential impression seeking expression, in short, in line with what our authors call a psychological transcendent. If one wants to experience the forest, this is an excellent way of saying that one is in the presence of immediate immensity, of the immediate immensity of its depth. Poets feel this immediate immensity of old forests, pious forests, shattered forest, where the dead are left lying, infinitely closed, dense with pinkish, straight old stems, infinitely serried, older and grayed on the vast, deep, mossy bed, a velvet cry. The poet here does not describe. He shows that his is a greater task. The pious forest is shattered, closed, serried. It accumulates its infinity within its own boundaries. Farther on in the poem, he will speak of the symphony of an eternal wind that lives in the movement of the treetops. Thus, Jean Piaget's forest is immediately sacred, sacred by virtue of the tradition of its nature, far from all history of men. Before the gods existed, the woods were sacred, and the gods came to dwell in these sacred woods. All they did was to add human, all too human, characteristics to the great law of forest reverie. But even when a poet gives a geographical dimension, he knows instinctively that this dimension can be determined on the spot for the reason that it is rooted in a particular oneric value. Thus, when Pierre Gauguin speaks of the deep forest, he adds a dimension. But it is not the dimension that gives the image its immensity, its intensity. And when he says that the deep forest is also called the quiet earth, Because of its immense silence curdled in 30 leagues of green, Gauguin bids us participate in transcendent quiet and silence. Because the forest rustles, the curdled quiet trembles and shudders, it comes to life with countless lives. But these sounds and these movements do not disturb the silence and quietude of the forest. When we read this passage of Gauguin's book, we sense that this poet has calmed all anxiety. Forest peace for him is inner peace. It is an inner state. Poets know this, and some reveal it in one line, as for instance Jules Superville, who knows that in our peaceful moments we are sensitive inhabitants of the forest of ourselves. Others, who are more logical, such as Rene Menard, present us with a beautiful album devoted to trees, in which each tree is associated with a poet. Here is Menard's own intimate forest. Now I am traversed by bridle paths, under the seal of sun and shade. I live in great density. Shelter lures me. I slump down into the thick foliage. In the forest I am my entire self. Everything is possible in my heart just as it is in the hiding places in ravines. Thickly wooded distance separates me from moral codes and cities. But one should read this whole Poe's poem, which, as the poet says, is actuated by a reverent apprehension of the imagination of creation. I like this poem. I want to read it. In the domains of poetic phenomenology under consideration, there is one adjective of which a metaphysician of the imagination must beware. That is the adjective ancestral. For there is a corresponding valorization to this adjective, which is too rapid, often entirely verbal, and never well supervised, with the result that the direct nature of depth imagination and of depth psychology generally is lacking. Here, the ancestral forest becomes a psychological transcendent at small cost. It is an image suited to children's books. And if there exists a phenomenological problem with regard to this image, it is to find out for what actual reason, by virtue of what active value of the imagination, such an image charms and speaks to us. The hypothesis according to which it is due to remote permeation from infinite ages is a psychologically gratuitous one. Indeed, if it were to be taken into consideration by a phenomenologist, such an hypothesis would be an invitation to lazy thinking. And for myself, I feel obliged to establish the actuality of archetypes. In any event, the word ancestral, as a value of the imagination, is one that needs explaining. It is not a word that explains. But who knows the temporal dimensions of the forest? History is not enough. We should have to know how the forest experiences its great age. Why in the reign of the imagination there are no young forests. I myself can only meditate upon things in my own country, having learned the dialectics of fields and woods from my unforgettable friend Gaston Rupnel. In the vast world of the non-I of fields is not the same as the non-I of forests. The forest is a before me, before us, whereas for fields and meadows my dreams and recollections accompany all the different phases of tilling and harvesting. When the dialectics of the I and the non-I grow more flexible, I feel that fields and meadows are with me, in the with me, with us. But forests reign in the past. I know, for instance, that my grandfather got lost in a certain wood. I was told this, and I have not forgotten it. It happened in a past before I was born. My oldest memories, therefore, are 100 years old, or perhaps a bit more. This, then, is my ancestral forest, and all the rest is fiction.